The biggest storyline coming into the 2025-2026 NBA season for the Lakers was the impact that a guy like DeAndre Ayton could potentially have. This guy's 27 years old. He's in his prime. He's a guy that could probably flip the Lakers from, going from a team last year that really struggled in the playoffs to defend the rim to a team that actually could be a very, very solid front court. And I say this given the talent that they have. I still think Jackson Hayes has a lot of upside, especially given that his role this year will not be to be like the main guy, but he'll be in a secondary role. DeAndre Ayton, right in his prime, 27, has kind of shown us, when he's fully healthy, when he's motivated, he could be a really, really good rim defender as well. And he can score down in the post, right? So that really opens things up for the Lakers. Plus, there's also an insight into the Lakers' potential fifth starter, which we'll also talk about in this video. I want to start right away, man. Let's just talk about Ayton. People look at that plus minus that he had against the Warriors, right? He was minus 25. Some people look at that number and say, this guy struggled, and this guy is not what the Lakers have kind of paid for. And it's kind of crazy because it's only 2 games into the preseason, but, I'm seeing comments on social media where people are criticizing Ayton, saying he's not a good basketball player. But it's kind of crazy to me because DeAndre Ayton was not brought into the Lakers to be score 30 points a game type of player. That's not what Ayton's brought in for the Lakers. In fact, when I watch the actual tape, and trust me, the tape does not lie. When I watch the actual tape with a guy like Ayton, the guy's actually making the plays that he's supposed to make. The guy's defending the rim. And it's very clear, if you guys just put the tape on, the impact that this guy's having. And maybe not that first game against the Suns, but more recently against the Golden State Warriors, this guy had multiple plays where he defended the rim. He had multiple blocks. Right? I think officially he had 2 blocks, but never look at the block stat, right? Because there are plays that are going to be impacted. You might have Steph Curry or someone else driving to the basket, and this guy might get a hand up, and although he doesn't block the pass, he impacts the ball from going in, right? He impacts the shot. To me, what I've seen from Ayton as a defender, this guy defending the rim, he's looked good out there. He's done things that I feel like you cannot overlook. He already has 4 blocks in these first 2 games, and he's not even a full-time starter at this point, or at least he's not playing full-time minutes, which we know when the actual season comes around, Ayton will be playing full-time minutes. He played 21 minutes against the Warriors, and he still had 2 blocks, had multiple plays where he impacted the shot, and even a potential bigger role that this guy could have, or a bigger impact this guy could have, is going to be his ability to rebound. And not just on the defensive side, right? The Lakers have struggled, like in the playoff games that they had last season. I felt like when they had Jackson Hayes out there, you could get a guy that could rebound, but then you couldn't really play Jackson Hayes because he'd either foul out, have too many fouls, or he just couldn't properly defend without fouling, or he'd struggle on the offensive side. So you couldn't really go with Jackson Hayes. And when you couldn't go with him, the Lakers struggled to rebound the ball even on the defensive side. Right? They had multiple possessions where they would struggle. With Ayton, the guy's already rebounding the ball well, right? 15 rebounds in these first 2 games, 3 offensive rebounds. And one of those offensive rebounds that he grabbed, he kicked it out to Austin Reeves, and Reeves hit a 3-point shot. So Ayton's, getting the Lakers extra points, extra possessions by being able to properly rebound. He's defending the rim, right? He's blocking shots. There's no stat out there for the defensive impact that this guy has. To me, DeAndre Ayton is doing exactly what the Los Angeles Lakers brought him in to do, and he still has to learn, the offensive and defensive scheme that the Lakers are going to be running. Right, JJ Redick's going to have his own thing that he's going to kind of do on the offense and defensive side. He still is trying to learn all that stuff, right? I know training camp's not technically over, but this guy still has a lot that he's going to continue to learn. And then being able to actually do it against live competition is different than doing it against the same guys over and over and over again in practice. So when I look at Ayton, he's doing exactly what the Lakers brought him in to do. And don't look at some of those plus minus stats because oftentimes they're overrated. You have backup players in at this point, right? LeBron's not out there. Luka's not playing. Reeves isn't out there, right? Or at least wasn't against the Warriors. And even Marcus Smart at this point. Smart may be the best defender that the Lakers have. He's not playing either. So the plus minus stats could easily be skewed because you have some backup players out there. Either way, really impressed with some of what Ayton has kind of showed us, at least from a tape perspective. And if you guys have followed this channel or followed me, you know, I posted some content on this channel, you guys will know that I am a heavy tape watcher. And again, I think the Lakers are in a really solid spot, but in order for them to take that next level, especially this season, it's going to be important for them to figure out the starting five. And, you know, the starting five doesn't matter as much as figuring out, like, from a minutes perspective, which guy's going to end up playing the most. I think the minute aspect is a lot more important than the actual starting five. But still, figuring out the starting five, the first five, and then figuring out, you know, who you're swapping at what point, and then who the next five are out there, that's going to be the important thing for the Lakers this season. Obviously, most people would agree that DeAndre Ayton, Luka Doncic, LeBron James, Austin Reeves, those four guys are pretty much guaranteed to start for the Lakers this season. And then the fifth spot is kind of up in the air. Now, some people would say, hey, Marcus Smart makes sense. But at the same time, you can say, well, he hasn't practiced, right? Or at least he missed like 4 or 5 weeks of training camp. So it might not make sense to go forward with him, given he hasn't really learned the playbook, the scheme on the offensive defensive side. You can even look at a guy like Jared Vanderbilt. He could potentially start. Rui Hachimura might actually be the front runner at this point. In fact, that's what one Lakers insider believes. Anthony Irwin said that according to his sources, Rui Hachimura is considered the likeliest fifth Lakers starter. In fact, according to sources close to the Lakers, obviously they're going to be anonymous as they put this report out there, Rui Hachimura is considered the heavy initial favorite to land the fifth starting spot alongside Luka, LeBron, Austin, and DeAndre Ayton. Heading into camp, Hachimura was always considered at least a slight favorite over Marcus Smart, but with Smart unable to participate for at least the first week of training camp, that gap has widened considerably. To me, this is an interesting report. You know, I personally really like what Rui Hachimura has shown us over the past season with the Lakers. I think he was really, really, really underrated last year. But I also look at the Lakers and I say, hey, does Rui Hachimura make the most sense to start given the initial lineup you have out there? Ayton, Doncic, LeBron, Austin Reeves. Does Hachimura make the most sense? And I know you could look at the Lakers and say, yes, it can make sense because you can easily make switches right after 4 or 5 minutes of being out there. You can easily throw in Marcus Smart or Jared Vanderbilt or Gabe Vincent or whoever it is. But I think one of the things we have to realize is, you know, if you put out Rui Hachimura as a starter, if you make a swap, right, and let's say you take out Doncic or you take out LeBron or you take out Austin Reeves, and then let's say Marcus Smart comes in and Jared Vanderbilt comes in, Jake LaRavia potentially comes in, Gabe Vincent. Well, who's going to score points for the Lakers? Because from a defensive perspective, you might not give up any points at all, or very few, right? Marcus Smart, really good defender. Jared Vanderbilt, really good defender. But by having those two guys out there at the same time, you're almost limiting yourself on the offensive side. And I know those two guys might not actually be out there together 100% of the time. You know, you can rotate guys. You can rotate which guy comes in at what point. But I almost feel like by going with Rui, you know, I think Rui is a very, very solid three-point shooter. You can also score if you give him the ball. You know, you can run him in pick and roll situations. Again, I almost feel like by putting in both Marcus Smart and Vanderbilt coming off the bench together potentially, it is going to limit your offense a little bit. I think the best thing the Lakers can do is start one of those two guys. And honestly, I think Marcus Smart just makes the most sense given how great he's already been on the defensive side. You know, think about this. When you have Rui out there paired up with the four obvious starters in Luka, Reeves, LeBron, and Ayton, if you put Rui out there, well, who's going to be the guy to cover Steph Curry or Anthony Edwards? Who's going to be the guy to step up and cover those guys? Rui is probably the obvious answer, and I know LeBron can also cover, right? He's a phenomenal defensive player. But is LeBron gonna cover the main guy on the other side on a random Tuesday? He's probably not, right? We know LeBron, and he's also going to save a lot of that energy for when the playoff times kind of come around. I think for the Lakers, the smartest thing is just to roll forward with Marcus Smart. I think he gives you the most potential in terms of like how you can, you know, mix in with offensive production and defensive production. I think that just kind of makes sense. The one thing I will say is there's a wild card within all this that we might not realize, and that's going to be Jake LaRavia. And I know Jake LaRavia will come off the bench, especially early on in the season, right? He's not going to start for the Lakers. Obviously, that wouldn't make sense. But the guy has flashed, man. He's only 23 years old. To me, this is the guy that could really turn this Lakers roster into a completely different type of roster. Right? What I mean by that is the Lakers are already pretty talented. They already have a lot of different guys. But like the thing with Jake LaRavia is because he's still so young, he's still gonna grow into a type of player. And with LaRavia, you know, the guy can catch and shoot, but he can also create his own shot. And he's also a very good defender when he locks in. Right? I know some people disagree with that, but like when he locks in, he's a pretty good perimeter defender. And again, he's 23 years old, so he's going to still continue to get better. And, you know, defense is oftentimes also like effort, right? If you put in more effort, you'll be a little bit better on the defensive side. In fact, Austin Reeves talked a little bit about LaRavia. I want you guys to listen to this, and then we'll talk about this on the other side.
Allison, how have you seen Drake compete in the mix with all you guys? I think he's been great. You know, obviously there's some things here and there that he hasn't done to the standard that I'm sure he wants to, but at the same time it's not easy to come into a new team and be really really good off the get go. We have a lot of he's got a lot of promise, and he can be somebody that we really need on this team, and we know he can do that, and we just keep encouraging him to do that. So very excited.
Austin Reeves is saying that Jake LaRavia has a lot of promise, and he can be somebody that we really need on this team. And he also throws it out there saying, I think he's been great. I'm excited for LaRavia, man, more than a lot of other players for the Lakers. You know, I'm excited for Marcus Smart to see what he can kind of do and how he fits in. But LaRavia, man, I really do think has a lot of upside. And obviously, we'll see how guys like Max Kleber and Jackson Hayes, kind of fill out and how they, how many minutes these guys actually end up playing. Jackson Hayes, to me, just mental mistakes, right? We saw last year, he came into the playoffs, too many fouls, right? And we're kind of seeing those same patterns early on. We're already seeing games with Jackson Hayes where he had 4 personal fouls in 11 minutes. Literally in the first half, he had 4 fouls. You can't have that if you're Jackson Hayes. And, the pressure that he's essentially getting right now, I think at some point he'll be able to click and he'll be able to have a little bit of success. But right now he's struggling. And the thing with Jackson Hayes, I will say, is, he looked really good last year when the Lakers still had Anthony Davis, right? He was coming off the bench. And I think that helped him a lot. And then when he was kind of thrown in to be the starter, he struggled a little bit or had moments where he struggled. This season, he gets to go back and be like that number 2 guy behind Ayton. So I do think Jackson Hayes will have success for the Lakers this season. But I want to know what you guys think about Hayes. I want to know what you guys think about LaRavia. Am I overhyping him a little bit? We'll see what ends up happening. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. And I hope you guys enjoyed this video. My goal for this channel is to continue to put content out like this here, where we'll cover multiple topics. We'll cover multiple, interesting points. And of course, this channel is always going to be based off the tape. That is one thing I'll promise you guys. Tape is where it's at, right? So let me know what you guys think. Thumbs up, subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time with another video.